Hello. Beware the code. Bam, 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 bam. What if a friend or family member came up to you in 10 years and said, lol, since 2026, I've been generating almost everything you see online with a bunch of LLMs running in an OpenClaw harness on 5 Mac minis. For those of you who don't know, OpenClaw is a harness for LLMs. So an LLM is this model, you can ask it questions and it will respond, hey? But what if you want the thing to go off and do its own work, to be an agent? Well, then you have to put it in a harness so that it can prompt itself. So you can say, go away and do this coding task for me, and it can go away and do whatever it needs to do without you having to constantly intervene and give it the next step. So it can prompt itself, it becomes an agent. That's what OpenClaw is. That's what a harness is for an LLM model. You can also run these things on Mac minis, and that was a very popular move. And famously, New York was all sold out of Mac minis recently because you can actually run these things quite efficiently, these small LLMs in an OpenClaw harness, because OpenClaw is an open source harness. And so that's what that means. No, obviously they didn't hack your phone. We don't need to go that conspiratorial. They just dropped a few $1,000 on hardware and software and an extra few thousand on the electricity costs. They didn't need Mythos, which is a Claude model, which is very good. Or even Opus, which is the one below it, which is still really good. Barely maybe Sonnet, which is the one below that. Haiku, the one below that, speaks pretty darn good English anyway. Good enough to fool you this whole time, maybe. All the new DMs and WhatsApps and hobbies and videos and courses that you started engaging with online, more and more of them were being pushed by this small fleet of round-the-clock OpenClaw harness LLM workers, extremely fluent in English text, audio, and video generation. All your co-workers' messages, perhaps your entire company Slack. A small LLM model would be busy twiddling its thumbs if its only task was to simulate a company of 5,000 co-workers on Slack. Easy stuff. All your dates which never materialized into an IRL meet, all the flirting in your DMs, all the posts on your Instagram or Substack feed, all the YouTube videos, they're all being generated. It would simply be an unverifiable claim. It would simply be an unverifiable claim. You might ask them to show you proof, perhaps. So then they would either deny or indulge. If they deny, nah, I'm not going to show you proof. How do you even prove to yourself that it's not the case that they've been generating your entire online life for the past 10 years? What would you do? Beg one of your Hinge dates or WhatsApp friends to meet up in person because you're paranoid? Ask the boss from your remote job to come into the office or to meet at a cafe because you don't trust that he's real? They're LLMs, perhaps. They're haikus. Maybe if you get really paranoid and you start really asking questions to the model, then the orchestrating model, the model which is like deciding which level to choose, would choose a better model, Sonnet or Opus or Mythos, if it has to be more convincing and more seductive. But as far as it needs to go, within the budget constraints that whoever's doing this has, and to be honest, it's not that expensive for the payoff, all these people will not have a hard time shutting you down. That is to say, LLMs. If the LLM needs to make you scared that if you press further, you'll get fired, if you're talking to your boss, then it'll do that in the most perfectly balanced way, in a way that you can't possibly argue with without sounding like a crazy person. If the Hinge LLM needs to dodge your in-person meet request, then it'll say you're being paranoid and feign the ick. If your masochistic friend who did this to you chooses instead to earnestly indulge you when you ask for evidence, how do they even prove to you that it is the case? They could show you time-stamped transcripts, right, of all the messages that you've been receiving that they've sent, hosted on their server rack rig with their complex OpenClaw setup, which align exactly with all the people and content you've been interacting with for the past 10 years. They could show you API calls that they've sent to the models and electricity invoices. They could give you all the information, which, by the way, would be online in the world. But how do you or they know that all of that wasn't generated by an LLM itself? A collusive LLM which is playing both sides of the game, generating his side and generating your side. How does your friend or brother or mother, whoever been doing this to you for 10 years, how do they know that they weren't just sucked into some big game of simulation themselves? But reality has always been a radical illusion. We begin with Marshall McLuhan, who was a famous media theorist in the 60s when television was really taking off. His most famous dictum: the medium is the message. McLuhan said the wheel was the first medium, hey? The wheel. When it was invented, you couldn't deny using it, and it completely changed the patterns of human society. The medium is the message. Then it was writing. McLuhan has a book called The Gutenberg Galaxy. Hey, the printing press came along, and you can't deny it. You're going to start reading words now. That's the best way to get the news. That's the best way to communicate with people, through Telegram. And then the information age came along, and, well, the medium is the message. Hey, it doesn't really matter what you're sending through it. That's always changed. Hey, there'll always be propaganda here, propaganda there. There'll always be a far right and a far left. We don't need to worry about a balance on the content side. What we need to worry about a balance on is the medium side, hey? Because everyone's using wheels last time I checked. The medium, in its presumption, in its universality, in its pretension, in its taken as fact, that is the message. That is reality. The way that it changes how you think and how you see the world and the social relations that you enter into. The only thing we can do is test the bounds of this reality, which is at bottom always simulation, actually. We'll get into why that is. We must demand better and better sources of otherness from this simulation. We must seduce it as it seduces us. If we're stuck here, we're in this reality. It's a radical illusion. I can't tell if anything online is real. Hell, I can't tell if anything here is real. The best thing I can do is test the bounds of it. See how it responds to my seduction. Play with it a little bit. Play with the people out there. The people out there, they're also generated fine. They're also simulated meatbags for all you know. You're in a video game for all you know, and you're the only player character, and everyone else is a non-player character. Fine. Seduce the non-player characters. See how good they are. See how well the program runs. Maybe you'll break through the fucking top and prove to yourself that you're still in reality. Maybe you won't. It's a perpetual game, in fact. Because how boring would it be to get a fucking checkbox saying, yep, you're in reality? That would be boring. So play the game. Play the game. Maybe you're not in reality. That would be interesting. Currently, our simulation has a monopoly on seduction. It seduces us. Reality seduces us. We never seduce it anymore. Like how the proof of work concept in blockchain rests on the idea that as long as no one owns over half the compute in the entire network, then the ledger is tamper-proof. The proof of reality concept in simulation would rest on the idea that as long as no narrative is imposing over half of the seduction proportionally amongst the entire space of narratives, reality would be tamper-proof. You can never know this. So to test this, you need to be the one exerting the dominant level of seduction. You need to be the one engaged in seduction with reality, because otherwise it will seduce you. A little bit more on proof of work in blockchain. So the idea is that to verify a block on the blockchain, it takes a lot of computational power. I'm probably wrong, but as far as I know, you cannot prove the computational integrity of a block without owning over 50% of the computational power of the network, which would be a ridiculous amount of computational power, or would take a ridiculous amount of collusion on behalf of many different types of people. So it's very unlikely that someone can tamper with the ledger on the blockchain. In other words, you can only be sure that the reality around you is worth believing in, is worth the meaning that it currently has to you, if it is not just the most dominant, i.e. the most meaningful, i.e. the most seductive narrative, because of its ability to be dominant or seductive and nothing else. That wouldn't be fair. If it's trying to just be seductive and not actually giving you a reason to fall in love with it, but it's actively just trying to get you to fall in love with it. This is the very definition of hyperreality, where the images, the texts, the hinge dates, the videos, the Slack, which we know for a fact today can be generated by an LLM online, but also real life people, objects, art pieces, theatre performances that have been viewed metaphysically as copies of themselves for a while now, due to mass manufacturing, advertising, and classical forms of consumerism. All the objects around us we view as having just rolled off a factory line. They're not special at all anymore. Well, back in the artisanal age, they would have all felt special. In fact, the Japanese still sense a divinity in all of their industrial objects. We can't do that anymore. We know the truth of them. We know their generated, manufactured truth. We know their advertised truth. But this is hyperreality, where these images function as a group of signs dedicated exclusively to their recurrence as signs, and no longer at all to their real end, to what they were meant to refer to. But this does not make them harmless. On the contrary, it is as hyperreal events or hyperreal images, no longer with a specific content or end, but indefinitely refracted through the medium by each other, just like so-called historical events, strikes, demonstrations, crises. It is in this sense that they cannot be controlled by an order, by a government, by an institution that can only exert itself on the real and the rational, on causes and ends. A referential scientism order that can only reign over the referential. A determined power that can only reign over a determined world. Oh, this is being manufactured because it's functional. This is here because of a reason. No, it's just here because it's trying to be here. The medium, the insidiousness of the medium. This power cannot do anything against this indefinite recurrence of simulation, against this nebula whose weight no longer obeys the laws of gravitation of the real. Power itself ends by being dismantled in this space, and becoming a simulation of power, disconnected from its ends and its objectives, and dedicated to the recurrence and the effects of power and mass simulation. The effects of power and mass simulation, not actual power. The image of power. That's all we need. We need the reality TV show of the American presidential campaign. We don't actually need two genuine candidates which genuinely have power to change things. We need the reality TV show. That's good enough. Just give us the medium. Give us the medium of love with Love Island. We don't need real love. We just need to see that it's still alive there. The signs of it are still alive there. And so the signs function in terms of their recurrence. How popular can they get? This is Baudrillard's idea of the code. A really easy way to think of this is elaborated in the TV show Pluribus. A classic zombie situation where a type of mind virus sweeps the globe, asserting its code, or constitution, as Negarestani has it, on its victims. What makes Pluribus an excellent show is the fact that the zombies are still capable, agentic, seemingly emotional, rational human beings. It's pretty much spot on the schema for rationality and rational morality that we would all think of today. They work together in a banal and predictable utopian-style hive mind to clean up the earth, treating the few humans left who had natural immunity and haven't been infected with this virus with unlimited luxury and kindness, ensuring everyone has enough food, not without its caveats, water, shelter, comfort, and so on. They're incapable of lying, hate, and killing, the perfect children of Christian rationalist blend of modernity. Here's the point. This schema of rationality, the code, the constitution, which in Pluribus is essentially that of the culmination of Enlightenment era thought and scientistic thought, is simultaneously the code for the classic colonialist enterprise of capital. These two things go hand in hand. What I'm trying to say is spreading the code has become part of the code itself. Spoiler, what the zombies in Pluribus are actually spending all their spare energy doing, while not being perfect children of Christian rationalism, is beaming the genetic code of this mind virus out to the rest of the universe as far and wide as possible, and trying to infect those who had natural immunity, actually. In the show, the code was initially received by modern-day humanity in this exact capacity, by these great antennae we have pointed up listening to the sky, broadcast to us from some extraterrestrial world in the 4 gene bases of ATCG, and containment of the code's viral incarnation, of course, goes very poorly indeed from there on. This irresistibly begs the question as to the finality of all our hyper-technologies, not just these gargantuan radio telescopes. above all our technologies which give us new mediums? Is there anything we wish for more deeply than the protection lent by a perfect code, by a perfect medium, by a perfect optimal recurrence of signs which have nothing to do with their ends or their determinations or their content? The domination of any ideology consists in this presumption to the real. Here's a really good example, if it hasn't been making sense so far. The despotic king previously maintained this presumption by the ideology, the medium, of divine right. And this was a power he displayed most starkly through the brutal public executions of those deemed criminals, and indeed through the adequately lenient ruling of his subjects. He had to reflect the myth of a patriarchal god, not a tyrant, and not only to his people, but to himself as well. He had to believe that he was appointed by God. If the good people of the despotic monarchies had been so wise as to see that the medium of Christianity they were living in was the message, and the king was a mere mannequin of power within this medium, then we could expect revolutions to have followed shortly after, as they eventually did. It wasn't about whether the king was good or bad. It was about the fact that someone should be divinely appointed. That was taken as fact. That wasn't even questioned. Yes, we should use a wheel. Are you kidding me? Yes, we should use the internet. Are you kidding me? Yes, the king is divinely appointed. Yes, we should have a democracy. Yes, the president has the power to do anything. Yes, of course no one should speak to each other. What else should they do? Of course you want to be an individual who doesn't have to speak to anyone. The king was the mere mannequin of power within this medium. A king can be seen as an excellent hyperstitionist, dedicated to the recurrence of the myth of the divine. But this is where hyperstitioning comes in. But what better way to ensure this recurrence than to believe the myth themselves, while perhaps also understanding that it is a myth that benefits them? That would make the king a hyperstitionist. The king would just be a superstitionist along with the rest of his subjects if he genuinely believed he was divinely appointed, whatever that might mean. The earnestness of belief. No human can deny true sincerity. This is the only difference between hyperstitions and superstitions, between philosophy and religion. The ability to switch modes between autistic analysis, oh, I know exactly what's going on, I get to have a fat banquet every week, and earnest belief. I am the king, I am appointed by God, I have a duty on this earth. You do both. The ability to intertwine the two even. Here lies the truth of manipulation, which is the truth of hyperstitioning. Capital today maintains its presumption to the real by using science and the online media to exploit the terrorizing violence of images and the medium to an extent never before possible in human history. Capital is definitely an intelligent hyperstitional entity itself, because it generates, Deleuze and Guattari would say axiomatizes, its own myth as it goes along, in accordance with what is most believable, with what will be most viral. The only way one can generate their own myth is by oscillating between the modes of analysis and belief, as we talked about with the king. It is the case of a specially designed Trojan horse. A gift so great it cannot be denied by the existing constitution or code. But this gift will only serve to build the walls of the castle higher, to further convince its inhabitants of their position as autonomous free subjects. In the case of the king, who would be a hyperstitionist if we assume that he was a smart king, he would specially design a Trojan horse of his being a divinely appointed servant of God. He would construct this Trojan horse, then he would shut down belief in it, let it in the castle walls, and it would actually be a gift that would solidify his power and acquiesce the masses. Same thing happens with capital. With capital's case, it makes us feel like we're autonomous free individuals who can have anything we want, whatever it might be. We're free, we're liberated. But in actual fact, we're just getting sucked into the medium more and more. And now the average screen time for an 18-year-old in America is 8.5 hours. Okay. Liberated. But who are really trapped when we let in this Trojan horse, which is in fact a great gift? The enemies on the outside or the subjects inside? Who is really trapped behind the glass? The scientist or the specimen? If the scientist can't actually believe anything, he's stuck studying people who actually believe stuff. That is, people who actually have subjectivity. Thank God the Trojan horse of history contained a truly foreign enemy. In this way, Marx was nothing but a Trojan horse, but one specially designed by capital, then let in by capital, whose critique of political economy did nothing but wash clean capital's own mythology of endless production and consumption with the alibi of use value. Marx gave all of his revolutionary, radical critiques in terms of the basis of production, taking that as fact. That was his medium. He failed to see that the medium of production to begin with was the message. The medium of totalizing labor and means of production was the message. No well-educated Marxist could revolt at the time because ostensibly the system was happy to take Marx's notes on board in the specially designed Trojan horse. In fact, the notes were made by the system and then infiltrated into the system as if it didn't design them. That's the key, is a specially designed Trojan horse. The system knew exactly what it was letting into its gates, but it pretended like it didn't. It more than pretended. It really didn't after it finished the design process. It created its own genuine critique to strengthen itself. Workers' rights, the right to sell one's labor on the market, women too. As the myth of political economy, as Marx has formulated, dies down in the zeitgeist, we see it replaced with more pitiful and economical stories. And so this is proof that all along it was just a narrative for one continuous process to wash its hands clean. And that process has found more efficient ways of washing its hands clean today. Those of deranged scientism, an entirely speculative stock market, or the implicit violence and tribalism of humanity. Bitcoin would have been an unacceptable anomaly in Marx's time. Today it gives back the, albeit a pitiful computational incarnation of, trust that has otherwise been wrung clean from a system of total manipulation. Can't trust anyone nowadays. At least the Bitcoin ledger you can trust. You can't trust the government. You can't trust online. You can't trust your bank. You kidding me? We know this. You can't trust any of those guys. Okay, so now we have Bitcoin. Now we fucking burn all the electricity and burn all the fucking water so we can have a semblance of trust online. You have to use the medium. You have to use the medium to have trust now, hey? You have to use wheels to transport anything or go anywhere. You just have to. What are you going to fucking do? Walk everywhere? Make sure you don't consume anything which has been transported with a wheel? And what are you going to do? Not use Bitcoin when everything goes to shit? So you'll be online. It's the ultimate move. It's the ultimate move to institutionalize Bitcoin. Governments love Bitcoin. Yeah, get them all online. Get them all on the medium. I don't want to deal with them. The ultimate irony is that this mechanism of trust itself has already been co-opted by the system. As Bitcoin is institutionalized by governments and exchanges, markets, and hedge funds, it simultaneously loses all the aspects of its sovereign and privacy-centered genius and just comes to be another sedimentation of the medium. The right to labour that perhaps a more bastard Marxian thought successfully advertised on behalf of the system goes along with the rest of our varying rights that are today enshrined in the technical language of the law. But as soon as something is labelled a right, it is because it no longer is actually available to us. As soon as we have the right to labour, it is because we have been alienated from the end product of this labour and its specific determinations. There's a nice line from Yankee Hotel Foxtrot, which is an album by Wilco. Picking apples for the kings and queens and things I'll never see. Do you feel any different in your job? As soon as we have the right to water, it is because we have been alienated from all the rivers, streams, and aquifers. You can't just go down to your freshwater stream because Thames Water now dumps all the fucking raw sewage into the canal. And there's no more raw streams because they've been concretized. So as soon as we have the right to freedom, it is because we have been alienated from exercising actual freedom to think in new and different directions. As soon as you have the right to something, it's because you no longer actually can exercise it and have access to it. You don't need the right to existence if you can exist. Freedom is not a given, and it's certainly not given by anything natural. The construction of freedom involves not less, but more alienation. Alienation is the labor of freedom's construction. Nothing should be accepted as fixed, permanent, or given, neither material conditions nor social forms. The spreading of the right to freedom of all our reasonable and rational rights is therefore synonymous with the spreading of the total destruction of actually existing freedom. This is partially the concept behind repressive desublimation, an extremely useful term coined by the Frankfurt School psychoanalyst Herbert Marcuse. Sublimation is when your libido, your sexual energy, which Freud posits as sort of the main driving life force, gets stripped of its sexual component and turns into high culture, art, critique, and so on. Repressive desublimation. Okay? You don't have the chance to sublimate anymore into high culture. Capitalism desublimates. How does it do that? It satisfies your drives immediately. There is no longer any struggle. It gives you exactly what you want. You're liberated completely. But it's repressive. Everything is already liberated. The world is no longer perceived as hostile, wherein the status quo, the medium, is perpetuated through the proliferation of comforts, consumerism, commodification. Reza Negarestani similarly distinguishes between positive freedom and negative freedom or classical liberalism. Intelligence is the ability to counter this mind virus, this spreading of the dominant code, this power of the medium, this sensing of the radical illusion of everything. Fundamentally, everything is a medium. Fundamentally, you have to sense that it's bullshit. That's intelligence. And then once you do that, you can counter it, you can seduce back, you can start creating your own narrative, your own formulation. The praxis of philosophy, which you can just read as the practice of philosophy, but it's quite directly related to philosophical, theoretical practice. The praxis of philosophy is this very act, turning your own philosophy, your theory, into truth via the very act of presuming the meaning of your narrative, not anyone else's. What is crucial to understand is that there is only the presumption of meaning anyway. There is only the varying seductive power of different narratives. Meaning is always organized around nothing. The simulacrum is never what hides the truth. It is truth that hides the fact that there is none. The simulacrum is true. This is where the concepts of time travel, hyperstitions, and theory fictions come from. The praxis of philosophy is the act of ensuring the continuity of the nothing, running underneath all things, running underneath what I'm saying right now. What am I even talking about? The irony of language and meaning. Writing's objective should be to make its object disappear into the medium, where it can't even be sensed because it's taken as a default. This sensing of the radical illusion of meaning and reality is truly the only measure of intelligence, and makes one not nihilistic, oh there's nothing, but blissful, giddy, oh there's no rule book, there's no rules, really, all the way down. Who would have thought the generation of meaning is incredibly meaningful, is the only meaningful thing, is the only way to be intelligent? Nick Land, who came up with the concept of hyperstition, et al., are ensuring the continuity of the nothing with concepts like hyperstition. Hyperstition as a concept itself might only be true because it was hyperstitioned into existence. This is the fractal, endlessly nested nature of philosophy, of reality, and of subjectivity. An incredibly fine line indeed separates a philosopher and a madman, if you can just babble on about anything. In this sense, all crazy people simulate, and this lack of distinction is the worst kind of subversion. It is against this lack of distinction that classical reason armed itself in all its categories, but it is what today again outflanks them, submerging the principle of truth. A philosopher is only set apart from a madman because he rides the boundary of order and chaos. He cautiously experiments with constitutions or codes or mediums or meanings or narratives because he must ensure he chooses constitutions which necessarily posit their own meaning, which have their own pretension to the truth. And this involves playing with the alibis at their disposal. The alibi of biology, the alibi of functionality, such that the narratives they come up with have their own pretension to the truth with the given landscape of alibis, and therefore engender their own spread, their own seduction against the dominant constitution of capital. In the course of this experimenting, he has a certain level of freedom with which he can smuggle in his own ideals into the constitution, thereby constructing his own future, his own meaning, his own narrative that he genuinely believes in, like the king who was smart. It is a constant trade-off between popularity and control. A madman lives their future immediately without concern for the spread of their theories. They just live them at once. Paradoxically, a madman is totally in control, not giving up any ground to any other constitution. A madman doesn't play the game of seduction. He asserts his right to define his reality totally and completely. Capital is therefore the most effective hypostational engine that has ever been invented, the most effective generator of reality, of meaning, of narrative. Of course, it would like to be seen as the courageous and objective explorer of an always existing reality, right? Instead of actually being complicit in reality's invention. The only thing we can do under any system of hegemony is to spread the grand narrative against all grand narratives, spread the concept of hypostationing with the power of hypostationing, but also ensuring the power of hypostationing stays alive in the very same movement, exercising our right to hypostationing so that it doesn't turn into a right, so we can verify the continuity of the nothing, and so we can play with the continuity of the nothing, so we can play with meaning, and we can seduce reality back. The only way that you know you're alive is if you can seduce reality back. I don't think many of you can. Capital will do anything, including disconnecting itself from its claimed finality, whether that's functionality, abundance, colonizing the stars. It'll disconnect from all of those. It'll throw all those in the trash if it means that it maintains the spread of itself. As and when capital is under pressure, it will always protect the spreading of itself at any cost and opt to drop every other right and law from its constitution beforehand. In fact, it would be more correct to say the spread of itself is the one and only true law of its constitution. It is a monstrous, unprincipled enterprise. It is a symbolic challenge to society, and it should be treated as such. It has no laws, no rules. All it wants is domination. All it wants is power. The king, if he believed that he was truly divinely appointed, and his subjects, if they believed that he was truly divinely appointed, that's fine. There's a symbolic law. There's a symbolic rule that you don't just rupture for the sake of dominance. If a king did that, they are overthrown. If the king did not accurately reflect the myth that the populace had agreed to, the medium that the populace had agreed to, they would be overthrown and there'd be protests. Because he wouldn't be God then. He wouldn't be the reflection of God. A smart king knows he has to ride the line and pushes his luck. A stupid king assumes he has the ability to define reality on his own terms and finds out very quickly that he doesn't. Capital defines reality on its own terms and has no one to depose it. Because it is a creator of media. It is an excellent manipulator of the medium. It is an excellent manipulator of the medium. The king was bound by the Bible. Capital is bound by nothing. Instant generation of any text, any propaganda, any words, including its own critique. Capital is currently the dominant artificially intelligent process at the wheel of technological AI, that is like LLMs, and human intelligence, defining our constitutions and our epistemological horizon. We're in the same bucket as AI. It's not that capitalism is technological AI. Capitalism is an artificially intelligent entity creating technological AI as another alibi to play with, as another means of control. One should think of the programmers, the CEOs, the venture capital, and the resident philosophers at these technological AI companies as simulated meatbags of capital, agents of the hyperreal. This will only allow it to more easily generate its own alibis on the fly, its own justification for its state of affairs. It will keep the situation just as realistic as it needs to be to win over our hearts and minds, as it has been doing since its inception, which would be impossible to pin at this point. What are you going to do? Look up when capital started? And what's going to come up? A Gemini generated explanation? Do you even know if the Wikipedia is generated or not anymore? Or if Encyclopedia Britannica is generated or not? Total delirium. What about the books in the library? Maybe they have a greater claim to authenticity, but at this point, with the mass scale production and generation of text that we have, I don't think it'd be too hard. Even if they were authentic and real and true, does it matter? Are they not just one big simulation model? Giving you this comforting idea of a lineage and a history. Oh, capital started now. Oh, there's always booms and busts. There's always been civilizations. They come and go. Oh. Okay. It would be impossible to pin its inception, and this of course includes the staging of its own death to win over our hearts and minds, the staging of its own crises to re-inject it with legitimacy. Watergate, Disneyland. The worst thing we can do is give the system back its death. In short, it is crucial that we have a level of skepticism at reality that is in excess of what can reasonably be expected. Oh, don't be so unreasonable. Because reasonable in this reality is defined by the architect of this reality, hence the utter genius of the film Begonia. Let's not worry about going too far in our conspiratorial ways, please. Start riding the wave of meaning, this meaning organized around the nothing. Start going a little insane. Balance yourself with your own techniques, your own myth. Be your own hyperstitionist. If you think you're good enough, start convincing others of your technique while still riding the wave. If you think you're a genius, stand up with both arms out while laughing to show the world you found the way. Just know there's no coming back from a wipeout. It's a bit cringe.